Before we begin, take a slow breath and let your body loosen. Tonight's story leans darker than the last, but its rhythm is steady, slow, and meant to ease you into a quiet drift. If you enjoy sinking into these strange corners of history while falling asleep, consider subscribing. For now, let the rest of the world fade and step into the early morning chambers of Mithridates VI, known to Rome in worried whispers as the Poison King. His palace rose above the Black Sea like a fortress carved from a single slab of stone. At dawn, light didn't warm the walls. It skimmed across their surfaces in thin streaks, lingering on sharp angles while deep pockets of shadow stayed untouched. Inside, servants moved in soft, disciplined patterns, careful not to disturb the stretched-thin quiet. A misplaced step in this place meant more than embarrassment. It meant drawing notice. Mithridates woke before the sun fully breached the horizon, as he always did sleep. For him, was not a surrender, but a negotiation. He lay still first, listening, not for birds or morning bells, but for any sound out of place. Only when the faint shuffle of guards changing posts drifted through the hallways did he open his eyes. He rose from his bed with deliberate calm. His body was lean, hardened by constant training rather than softened by luxury. Unlike many rulers, he mistrusted comfort. He believed softness dulled the senses, and dulled senses led to slow reactions. And slow reactions had nearly killed him more than once. On a small table beside his bed waited the first ritual of his day: poison. A narrow wooden tray held several small cups, one of cloudy clay, one of glass, another carved from polished horn. Each contained a measured dose of toxins most people would not survive. A physician stood beside the tray with rigid posture, hands clasped tightly. He had tested the mixtures through the night, knowing any miscalculation meant disaster. Mithridates picked up the glass cup first. Its bitter contents slid down his throat with a familiar burn. The physician watched him carefully. "A fraction stronger than yesterday," Mithridates murmured. "Yes, Majesty," the physician said. "Your tolerance grows. We must stay ahead of whatever your enemies might attempt." The king reached for the second cup, then the third, each blend made from lethal plants and metals: aconite, hemlock, controlled traces of arsenic. For most men, they would have been a swift end. For him, they were daily armor. As the poisons settled into his bloodstream, he crossed the stone floor to a narrow balcony. Cool air rolled in from the sea, carrying the scent of salt and distant smoke. Below, the city began to stir, fishermen pulling boats from shore, market stalls being raised, faint voices drifting upward. He rested his hands on the cold railing, letting the morning light brush his face. He studied the rooftops and streets, not with affection, but with ownership and caution. Somewhere within those twisting alleys, someone always plotted something: a bribe, a betrayal, a whispered rumor from Rome. His kingdom was held together not by trust, but by awareness. Behind him, attendants entered with slow steps. They opened heavy shutters, just enough to admit light without exposing the room entirely. Fresh guards rotated into their positions, their movements synchronized. Even sunlight in this palace was something controlled. The physician remained near the tray, still watching. He observed the steadiness in Mithridates' posture, the clarity in his eyes. The king showed no tremor, no weakness, nothing hinting at the danger he had just swallowed. The physician felt a quiet, cold respect, mixed with fear. Mithridates finally turned away from the view, the faintest tension lingering in his shoulders. Another day had begun, shaped by duty, danger, and deliberate discipline. Poison moved through his veins like a slow, invisible shield, and the palace seemed to stiffen in response, as if the walls themselves understood that their king was fully awake and ready. He stepped back into the dim chamber, mind already circling the day ahead. Councils, spies, messages from the frontier, whispers of Roman scouts. Every decision would be made with the same precision as his poisons, measured carefully, swallowed deliberately. The Poison King adjusted his cloak, felt the weight of the fabric settle across him, and moved forward with quiet, sharpened purpose. It was only morning, and already survival was in motion. Mithridates left the balcony with a slow turn, the light behind him cutting a thin outline along his shoulders. He walked through the chamber with steady purpose, feet silent on the polished stone. His guards followed at a respectful distance, their armor muted to avoid any sharp noise. Each man moved with the cautious precision of someone who understood the palace's rules. Nothing loud, nothing sudden, nothing careless. In this place, even footsteps felt watched. The hallway beyond was cool and dim, lit by narrow torches that flickered against ancient carvings. Scenes of past kings decorated the walls, victories, surrenders, alliances sealed in blood. Mithridates barely glanced at them. He had spent years studying history, only to decide he preferred shaping it rather than admiring it. He entered a long chamber where a wide table dominated the center. Upon it lay maps, reports, scrolls, and small metal markers shaped like armies and ships. A single scribe sat at the end of the room, quill ready but eyes lowered. The scribe did not speak unless ordered to, and he certainly never offered opinions. Those who had tried in years past no longer served at all. Mithridates moved to the map, placing a hand on the region representing his kingdom. The parchment was worn soft from years of planning. His fingers traced the coastline, then drifted inland, following mountain passes and river routes. He stopped at a thin red line. The frontier Rome always insisted was temporary. A guard stepped forward. "Majesty, a courier arrived during the night. The message is secure." The guard produced a sealed tablet, already inspected for traps. Mithridates accepted it, broke the clay seal, and read. His expression didn't change, but the scribe stiffened, sensing tension in the air. "Roman envoys have been sighted early," Mithridates said quietly, "earlier than their usual rhythm." Yalmaris, his oldest general, stepped into the chamber then, broad, stern, wrapped in a cloak dusted from morning drills. "Envoys or spies, Majesty?" "Rome rarely separates the two," Mithridates replied. "For now, we observe." The scribe wrote the exchange with neat, careful lines. A servant entered, carrying a tray of morning food. Bread, figs, olives, simple foods, intentionally bland. Every item had been tested twice. A taster waited in the hall, alive and standing, which was the only reason the tray had crossed the threshold. Mithridates tore a piece of bread and ate slowly, not for pleasure, but for fuel. He ate like a man filling a lantern, not a stomach. He gestured for the general to approach the map. What of the eastern borders? Quiet, Yalmaris said. Too quiet. Mithridates murmured. Silence can be a message. Before the general could reply, a second guard entered. Majesty, a traveller has been discovered at the lower gate. He carries no weapon, but he claims to have come from Roman lands. Mithridates' gaze sharpened. Does he request audience? He requests safety, the guard said, and says he carries warning. Bring him, Mithridates said. The chamber shifted slightly as the man was escorted in. Thin, sunburned, dressed in worn clothing, his posture wavered between desperation and discipline. He bowed deeply, voice quivering. Great King, Rome experiments with new poisons. They prepare antidotes. They study plants from your lands. They try to match what you already survive. The room held a breath. Even the torches seemed to lean in. Mithridates stepped close enough to examine the man's eyes. He saw exhaustion there, fear, and a strange sort of respect. No sign of deceit. Why come here? Mithridates asked. Because Rome fears you, the man whispered, and I thought you should know what they attempt. The king regarded him a long moment, then he nodded once. Feed him, give him water, and place him where he can rest under watch. The man sagged with relief. Mithridates returned to the map, his fingertips resting on the thin red border. If Rome improves its poisons, he said quietly, we improve ours. If they test antidotes, we evolve faster. Yalmaris nodded solemnly. As always. The king lifted his cloak, fastening it over one shoulder. We will adapt. We always do. The morning light grew brighter, sliding across the parchment and catching on tiny dust motes drifting through the air. The palace around him hummed softly with motion, guards shifting posts, servants gliding through halls, scribes sharpening quills. It was a kingdom wrapped in vigilance, and the Poison King walked forward, already shaping the rest of the day in his mind. Mithridates left the map chamber and crossed into the courtyard, the warning from the traveller still turning in his mind. He was not surprised that Rome studied poisons, but the timing bothered him. Rome liked to move slowly, pretending patience, but sudden interest meant something was shifting. He welcomed the tension. It sharpened him more than rest ever could. The training yard waited ahead, already filled with soldiers standing in ordered lines. Their armour was muted to avoid glare, their faces set in disciplined calm. Yalmaris stood with them, arms crossed. He bowed as the king approached. The men are prepared, Majesty. Then we begin, Mithridates said. He stepped into the yard and reached for a practice blade. Weighted like a real weapon, its edge dull, but its purpose serious. The yard smelled of iron and dust, the familiar scent of repetition and sweat. The stone floor bore marks from countless mornings just like this, from blows blocked and lessons learned. The first soldier stepped forward. He was older, experienced, with a steady stance. Mithridates circled him once, then struck. Their blades met with a sharp sound. The soldier countered quickly, but the king moved with precise steps, turning the attack aside. One clean twist of his wrist sent the weapon tumbling from the soldier's grasp. Your weight shifts too far to your heel, Mithridates said. Correct it. The soldier bowed deeply. A younger man approached next. He moved faster, eager to impress. His strikes came in a rapid pattern, testing the king's guard. Mithridates deflected each one, waited, then stepped inside the soldier's reach and stopped his advance with the dull edge of the blade pressed lightly against his shoulder. Speed without balance makes you predictable. The young soldier bowed, breathing hard. 2 more bouts followed. Each ended the same way. The king standing poised, the soldier correcting mistakes. Mithridates welcomed the strain in his muscles. Tension made him feel alive. Sweat gathered along his temples, but he did not show fatigue. When Jalmaris signaled the end of the drills, the soldiers bowed in unison. Mithridates returned the blade to its rack. His pulse slowed back to steady rhythm. Training was not ritual for him. It was armor no enemy could see. As he walked out of the yard, a messenger approached, bowing quickly. Majesty, scouts from the northern ridge report strangers watching the roads. They kept their distance but observed closely. Describe them, Mithridates said. Travelers, but too quiet. They avoided contact. They took notes. Then they are not travelers, the king said. They are Rome's eyes. Jalmaris stepped closer. Shall I send riders? No, Mithridates replied. We wait. Watching watchers tells us nothing. Let them grow confident. Then we move. He continued toward the herbal chambers, the air cooling as the corridor narrowed. The chambers smelled of dried leaves, crushed roots, and bitter oils. Shelves held rows of labelled jars, sorted by plant, origin, potency. This room was as important as any armory. The herbalist bowed. Majesty, the new antidote mixture is stabilizing. It holds form better than expected. Mithridates examined a vial, tilting it to watch the liquid cling to the glass. The color is deeper, he said. Yes, Majesty, a stronger reaction. Good. We will need stronger. He set the vial down. Rome studying poisons meant Rome intended to use them or feared them. Either way, it pushed him forward. As he moved through the chamber, he checked labels with quiet, practiced attention. Each contained a threat or a shield, depending on how it was used. He trusted this room more than he trusted most humans. A guard appeared at the doorway. Majesty, the foreigner you questioned this morning wishes to speak again. He says he remembers something important. Mithridates paused. Where is he? In the shaded hall, under watch. Bring him soon, Mithridates said. Fear loosens memory. Let us hear what it frees. He left the chamber and walked into the cooler hallway. Light filtered through narrow slits in the stone, casting thin shapes across the floor. The palace felt alert, as if the walls themselves listened for shifting winds. Mithridates welcomed the unease in the air. It meant change was close. It meant Rome was restless, and a restless enemy was easier to predict. The king lifted his cloak slightly and continued forward, ready for whatever the day would sharpen next. Mithridates walked toward the shaded hall with a controlled pace, the air cooling as he moved deeper into the quieter wing of the palace. This part of the building always held a heavier stillness. Confessions, warnings, and frightened memories seemed to settle into the walls themselves. 2 guards stood at the doorway. They straightened when he approached. Majesty, one said, bowing. The foreigner is inside. He claims to remember more. Good, Mithridates replied. Fear often reveals what caution hides. The guards opened the door inside. Filtered light cut thin lines across the stone floor. The foreigner sat on a low bench, wrapped in a heavy blanket. He rose quickly when the king entered, bowing with a tremor that showed he had not yet regained any true calm. Majesty, he said, voice tight, I recalled something important. Rome's scholars didn't only test poisons, they tested mixtures designed to imitate yours. They compared your antidotes with their own toxins. Mithridates studied him closely. The man's fear was real, his exhaustion too. For what purpose? They wanted to understand how much a normal man could survive, the foreigner whispered. They believe you have limits. They think duplicating your methods will reveal them. The king's gaze did not shift. His voice stayed level. A normal man, yes, but they misunderstand how my strength was earned. The foreigner swallowed hard. I thought you should know. Your name appeared often more than any other ruler. Mithridates paused, the faintest tension settling along his shoulders. And how did you escape them? Chaos, Majesty. A fire in their lower hall. The guards were distracted. I ran until my legs felt broken. I only wanted to survive. You did, the king said simply, and now you will rest. Feed him, he told the guards, and keep him under watch. A man carrying secrets must not wander. The foreigner bowed again. Relief and fear tangled across his expression, and the guards ushered him out. Mithridates remained alone in the room for a moment. Rome had always been curious, but curiosity sharpened by fear made them reckless. Reckless enemies made mistakes. He preferred enemies who made mistakes. Outside the hall, Jalmarus waited. His posture was tense, arms folded behind his back. Majesty, he said quietly. A second message arrived from the scouts. The strangers at the mountain roads returned at dusk. They carried tablets and measured the terrain. So they map our movements, Mithridates said, or search for weaknesses. Jalmarus nodded. Your command? Do nothing visible, the king answered. Send a small unit into the higher passes, hidden positions only. If Rome wants to track shadows, let them choke on silence. They walked through the palace together until they reached a balcony overlooking the city. From there, the morning had deepened into full daylight. Markets bustled, merchants argued gently over prices, and fishermen unloaded their nets. Smoke curled from cookfires in thin ribbons. It looked peaceful, almost gentle. Jalmarus exhaled through his nose. The people seemed calm. Calm is the state of those unaware they are prey, Mithridates said. Peace exists only when danger chooses to wait. He watched the city for a quiet moment, eyes scanning rooftops, alleys, and the faint lines of movement at the harbour. Everything in view held meaning. A shift in the fisherman's pattern might mean new taxes from a Roman ally. A stray rider on the road could be a messenger carrying lies. Even the direction of the smoke mattered. The wind changed when armies began to move. Rome grows impatient, Jalmarus said. Impatience is good, the king replied. It exposes their hand. The wind pressed lightly at his cloak as he stepped back from the balcony. The palace seemed to shift with him as he moved, its halls tightening into focused silence. Servants bowed quickly, but said nothing. Guards adjusted their stances with measured precision. Everyone could feel the edge in the air, subtle but present. Mithridates walked toward the inner chambers. The foreigner's warning had confirmed what he already suspected. Rome's attention was sharpening. Their scouts moved too boldly. Their scholars worked too quickly. And somewhere across the sea, a council of men believed they could finally understand him. He welcomed their effort. Understanding him was not the same as defeating him. He passed through a narrow archway leading to another hall. Morning light followed him in slow strips. The day still held many hours, many decisions, many quiet battles that no scribe would record. But the king met each moment with the same steady composure. The Poison King feared no toxin Rome could craft. He feared only complacency, and he had never allowed it to touch him. Mithridates left the balcony and walked into the quieter spine of the palace, where light thinned into narrow beams and every sound felt deliberate. This wing was meant for thought, not ceremony. The servants who crossed it did so with lowered eyes and careful steps. They sensed the tension in the air. Roman scouts, strange questions in coastal markets, nobles whispering about shifting winds. The palace always felt these things before anyone spoke them aloud. Jalmaris kept pace beside him, hands clasped behind his back. "Majesty," he said quietly, "the nobles have begun murmuring again. Small doubts, nothing bold, but enough to show their nerves are fraying." "Fear is expected," Mithridates replied. "Memory should be stronger. They owe their comfort to the strength they now question." "They fear Rome's attention," Jalmaris added. "Rome's attention does not choose kings," Mithridates said. "I do." They entered a circular chamber meant for brief, confidential reports. Rugs softened every footstep. Lanterns gave a low, steady glow. A young advisor waited with scrolls tucked against his chest. When the king entered, he bowed deeply, almost losing his grip on the papers. "Majesty," he began. "Messages from the coast." 3 foreign ships arrived at dawn. Their crews called themselves traders, but they questioned patrol routes, grain shipments, even the number of guards at the palace gates. "Too curious to be merchants," Mithridates said. "Our watchers followed them," the advisor continued. "They bought almost nothing. They split apart in the upper market." "Scouts, then," the king murmured. "Rome testing new angles." He dismissed the advisor with a slight motion. The young man nearly stumbled as he backed out of the room. Mithridates moved to a narrow stairway spiraling down into the older sections of the palace. With every step, the air cooled, and the sounds of the upper floors faded. These lower rooms carried the scent of stone and age. Here, walls were thicker, doors heavier, and secrets stored with precision. Past kings had kept jewels here. Mithridates kept information. He entered the archive hall, where shelves held tablets carved with codes and reports gathered from every corner of his realm. Guards kept silent watch, their eyes fixed ahead. Mithridates retrieved a tablet from the shelf, marked with recent border sightings. The watchers return to the same ridge, he said, always at dusk. They map the terrain, Jalmaris said. They look for patterns, Mithridates corrected. We will give them patterns they cannot read. He walked deeper into the archives until he reached a small chamber at the far end. A large map covered the table there. His private map, the one marked with subtle lines, hidden symbols, and faint notes. Only he understood it charted not simply geography, but movement, behavior, and intention. Rome grows too careful, Mithridates said. Their caution tells me more than their actions. Do we answer them openly? Jalmaris asked. No, Mithridates said. Open answers teach nothing. Quiet preparation teaches everything. He rested his hands on the table for a moment. The hall behind him was silent, but he sensed the palace above, guards shifting, servants whispering, messages being carried by quick hands. All of it formed a rhythm he'd learned to read like language. When the foreigner wakes again, Mithridates said, bring him to me. Exhaustion may have blurred details. Rest may sharpen them. Yes, Majesty. They climbed back up the stairway to the brighter floors. Afternoon light slid along polished stone, warming the walls but doing nothing to soften the king's expression. The palace grew busier as they walked. Messengers crossing halls, advisors waiting at corners, guards tightening their posts, as if the entire structure could feel Rome leaning closer with each passing hour. Mithridates moved through the activity with calm purpose. His cloak shifted behind him, brushing lightly against the stone. Every servant stepped aside early. Every guard straightened. He was not simply a ruler here. He was the engine that kept fear and loyalty in perfect balance. Rome's scouts watched from the passes. Their disguised traders asked prying questions. Their scholars tested poisons in his name. But Rome misunderstood something essential. Knowledge alone did not reveal how a man survived. As long as he had preparation was not his habit. It was his identity. The Poison King adjusted his cloak once more and continued through the palace, already turning the day's warnings into quiet strategy. Danger did not unsettle him. It merely reminded him that he was awake. The palace moved with a steady afternoon rhythm as Mithridates crossed the upper hall. The sounds were muted, soft sandals on stone, low exchanges between guards, the distant clatter of pottery being prepared for evening meals. Nothing rushed, nothing chaotic, but tension lingered beneath it all. Rome's presence had a way of tightening the air even before anyone spoke the word aloud. A servant approached with a small bronze tray. "Majesty," he said quietly, "the physicians prepared your afternoon tonics." "Place them in the western antechamber," Mithridates said. "I will inspect them myself." The servant bowed quickly and retreated. Jalmaris remained at the king's side. "The foreigner sleeps in short bursts," he reported. "Fear still grips him." "Good," Mithridates replied. "Fear remembers what pride forgets. I will speak to him when he wakes." They entered a long colonnade overlooking the inner gardens. Sunlight filtered between stone pillars. falling onto trimmed hedges and narrow channels of water below. The scent of herbs drifted upward, mint, fennel, and a sharper note from the medicinal plants cultivated under watchful eyes. A few birds hopped along the garden wall, barely disturbed by the palace's tension. A group of scholars waited at the far end, clutching tablets. They bowed, and one stepped forward. Majesty, new messages from Sinope. A courier from Galatia brings warnings. Warnings of what? Mithridates asked. Roman envoys, the scholar said. Too many, too frequently. They speak of new agreements. They ask pointed questions. Mithridates opened the tablet and read quickly. Galatia bends too easily, he said. They listen when they should resist. Shall we intervene? The scholar asked. In time, the king replied. Intervening too soon looks desperate. Intervening too late looks weak. The scholars bowed again and moved away with visible relief. Mithridates continued along the colonnade until he reached the medicinal wing. The scent changed instantly. Crushed roots, heated mixtures, fresh-cut herbs drying in bundles along the walls. This part of the palace felt like both a workshop and a battlefield. Two physicians approached with stiff posture. Majesty, one said, the afternoon mixtures were prepared according to your new ratios. Show me, Mithridates said. They led him to a low table where small clay cups were arranged in exact order. The darkest mixture sat at the center. He lifted it, swirled it once, then smelled it. Less iron, cleaner. We purified the root twice, the physician said. Mithridates drank the tonic in a slow swallow. It spread through him with familiar heat. It will do, he said. Prepare the next set for dawn. The physicians bowed deeply. Jalmaris watched him with quiet interest. Majesty, many men would not dare swallow what you do. Many men are not hunted, Mithridates replied. Armor that hides inside the blood is the only armor Rome cannot predict. They moved deeper into the wing, toward the experimental chamber where shelves held vials marked with symbols for potency and danger. One held a pale yellow powder. Mithridates lifted it. Mountain fig mixture. Yes, Majesty, the herbalist said, potent when heated slowly. Continue your tests, Mithridates said. Rome experiments in the open. We experiment in silence. Before the herbalist could respond, a guard entered with a short bow. Majesty, the foreigner is awake again. He asks to speak. Take me to him, the king said. They passed through several chambers until they reached the recovery room. The foreigner sat upright now, wrapped in a clean cloth. His eyes still held fear, but his thoughts were clearer. He stood and bowed unsteadily. Majesty, I remember more. Then speak, Mithridates said, taking a wooden stool. The posture was deliberate, less threatening, more coaxing. The foreigner swallowed. The Romans spoke of turning your people against you, not through battle, through fear. They think your strength comes from dark practices, from poisons and shadows. They plan to spread those stories. Mithridates remained silent for a moment. Then, fear is not their invention. It already belongs to me. But they hope to redirect it, the man whispered. Let them try, the king said. He stood, the stool barely shifting. The foreigner sagged with exhausted relief. Yalmaris waited at the doorway. Majesty, if Rome means to poison your reputation, then we will act before their words take root, Mithridates said. Fear spreads quickly, but truth, when wielded correctly, spreads faster. He walked from the chamber with measured calm, cloak trailing behind him. The palace followed his mood. Guards straightened, servants hushed themselves. Even the gardens outside seemed to quiet. Rome was testing more than poisons. They were testing patience. The poison king did not mind. Patience was another toxin he had mastered long ago. Evening settled slowly across the palace, turning daylight into amber streaks that slid along stone walls. Torches were lit in quiet succession, each flame brightening just enough to soften the shadows. Mithridates moved through the shifting light with practiced calm. Nothing in his stride revealed tension, though the palace around him carried it clearly. Servants stepped aside early. Guards straightened at the sight of him. Even the kitchens, usually a noisy place, felt subdued. Pots simmered softly, spices warmed in shallow bowls, and the scent of roasted grain drifted into the corridor. A guard approached. Majesty, the tasters approved the evening dishes. Place them in the inner chamber, Mithridates said. I will eat later. The guard bowed and left. Yalmaris walked beside him. Rumors spread again, he said. Servants whisper of omens and strange animals near the fields. The nobles claim Rome's shadow reaches deeper than before. Fear always finds shapes, Mithridates replied. But fear does not change truth. I do. They entered the strategy hall where a few trusted officers stood around a portable map. Thin metal markers indicated roads, patrol paths, and mountains. One officer stepped forward. Majesty, 2 scouts returned from the western ridge. They found signs of a hidden campfire, used briefly, likely last night. Footprints showed Roman-style boots. Mithridates studied the map. The flicker of torchlight made the inked lines shift, almost alive. Rome wants us to react, he said. Too quickly, and we teach them they can push us. Too slowly, and we teach them we didn't notice. What do you command? The officer asked. Adjust patrols, Mithridates said. Not predictably. Let Rome lose its rhythm. The officers bowed and stepped back. Mithridates left the hall and moved toward the northern wing. Windows opened to the sea, now dark, except for scattered torchlight along the harbour. Fishing boats drifted toward shore, silhouettes rocking gently. A servant rushed forward with a scroll. This came to the gate, Majesty. No seal. He offered it. Mithridates unrolled it and scanned the hurried script. Men near the riverbank, he said quietly. Asking about guard schedules. Yalmaris frowned. Too bold. Boldness shows impatience, Mithridates said. Send 2 pairs of our quietest men. They watch. They do not interfere. The servant bowed and ran to deliver the order. They continued to a narrow staircase leading to the observation tower. As they climbed, the sounds of the palace faded. The kitchens, the halls, the muffled conversations between officers. The stairs spiraled upward until the night air met them in a cool rush. At the top, Mithridates stepped onto the stone platform. From here, the kingdom stretched in all directions. Roads lit by small lamps, hearth fires glowing in distant homes, the mountains forming a jagged silhouette against the sky. The western ridge, dark and sharp-edged, drew his eye. Jalmaris joined him, cloak shifting in the breeze. "Some believe Rome prepares a test," he said. "Something more than scouting." "Rome always prepares many tests," Mithridates answered. "But preparation without understanding is weakness. They move as though they have already won." "And they haven't," Jalmaris said. "Not close," the king replied. He watched the horizon, unmoving. The night was quiet, but not empty. Every flicker of light had meaning. Every shadow suggested a direction. The calm of evening sharpened his thoughts rather than softening them. "Tomorrow," he said, "move our patrols at dawn and send a message to the nobles, calm, firm, nothing alarming. Tell them the king is aware of all movements." "And for Rome?" Jalmaris asked. "We let them see nothing," Mithridates said. "Nothing is more frightening to an ambitious enemy than silence." They descended the tower steps, the wind easing behind them. Back in the palace corridors, servants lit the last torches. Guards shifted into their night rotations, and the day's noise faded into a steady hum. Mithridates walked with the same composed pace as always. Rome's presence was growing, its questions spreading through markets, ridges, and riverbanks. But pressure did not trouble him. Pressure refined him. The Poison King welcomed nights like this. Quiet, calculated, sharpening. Night deepened across the palace, settling into the courtyards and halls like a heavy cloak. The torches burned lower now, flames steady and warm, casting soft gold across the stone floors. The palace guard shifted into their nighttime pattern, slower, quieter, with deliberate routes meant to catch anything out of place. Mithridates moved through the dim corridors with the same ease he carried during the day. His steps never hurried, never uncertain. A guard approached as he entered the inner hall. "Majesty," he said with a bow. "The evening patrols have taken position. The riverbank watchers left half an hour ago." "Good," Mithridates replied. "Let them move unseen." He passed through a carved doorway into a quieter part of the palace, where the light dimmed and the echoes softened. A pair of servants knelt near a fountain, filling jars with cool water for the night. They bowed quickly but kept their heads low, sensing the king's attention was elsewhere. Only the fountain's gentle trickle broke the silence. Jalmaris joined him again, matching his pace. "Majesty, the foreigner sleeps. The physicians say exhaustion finally overcame his fear." "He will speak more in the morning," Mithridates said. "Fear loosens truths, but rest arranges them." They continued down a long corridor lined with tall windows. Beyond them, the palace gardens lay in near darkness, lit only by a few well-placed lanterns that glowed like small embers in the night. The paths between the hedges formed quiet patterns, routes the king had memorized long ago, each one offering a different form of escape or ambush. To most, the gardens were peaceful. To him, they were another strategic map. A palace steward waited at the far end of the hall, holding a wooden tablet. When Mithridates approached, he bowed deeply. Majesty, reports from the outer villages came through before nightfall. Summarize. There are travelers asking questions. Some claim to be scholars mapping the land. Others pretend to be wandering traders. But all ask about border guards, gates, the timing of shipments. Too many coincidences, Mithridates said. Exactly, Majesty. The king gestured for the steward to leave the tablet. He skimmed the carved lines, reading the pattern beneath the surface. Strangers arriving in small groups, moving separately, but always asking the same questions. Quiet pressure from Rome, spreading like thin threads across the countryside. Mithridates handed the tablet back. Send riders to the nearest command posts. No panic. Just alert them to watch for the same questions. Yes, Majesty. The steward hurried away. Mithridates and Jalmaris then entered the long western corridor, where the walls were lined with shields taken from past battles. Some were cracked, others dented, each one marked by history. Mithridates paused beside a shield that bore the faded emblem of a Roman cohort. They sent these soldiers thinking my land was soft, Mithridates said. They left understanding it was not. Rome forgets its own lessons, Jalmaris said. It will remember, the king replied. They continued until they reached a small chamber used only in the late hours. A single lantern hung from the ceiling, its flame steady and quiet. A wooden table sat in the center with a few scrolls placed neatly upon it. This room served as the king's private refuge when he wanted silence without interruption. Mithridates took a seat, resting his hands on the table. Jalmaris remained standing near the door, waiting for instruction. Sit, the king said. Jalmaris obeyed. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of stillness carved from years of shared campaigns, long marches, and decisions made in the dark outside. The night wind brushed against the walls. Finally, Mithridates said, Rome inflames fear because it cannot win with clarity. They try to turn rumor into a weapon. And if they succeed? Jalmaris asked. They will not, the king said. But if they try, we strike not with force, but with certainty. Fear must be shaped, not avoided. Jalmaris nodded. Your people trust you. They trust strength, Mithridates corrected. And strength comes from being prepared before the storm even arrives. He stood and moved toward the window. The moon hung low over the hills, painting the rooftops in pale silver. The city beyond the palace walls slept quietly, unaware of the invisible threads Rome stretched toward them. Mithridates felt no anxiety, only a sharpened focus. Tomorrow, he said, we will begin our answers, quiet ones, measured ones, before Rome thinks it has set the pace. He turned back toward the chamber, cloak shifting softly. Let Rome whisper, he added. We will decide who hears what. The Poison King stepped into the hallway again. The palace lights flickering gently along his path. He felt the night adjust to his stride, as though the very stones recognized the beginning of a new chapter. Night had fully taken the palace by the time Mithridates returned to the central halls. The torches had burned lower, their flames smaller now, steady but softer, giving the stone walls a warm amber pulse. Most of the servants had retreated to their quarters. Only the night attendants moved through the corridors, carrying quiet tasks in quiet hands. The palace felt more like a fortress at this hour, watchful, alert, listening. Mithridates walked toward the council wing, where only a few lamps glimmered behind the carved doorways. Yalmaris followed, posture straight despite the long day. "Majesty," he said in a low voice, "our watchers at the riverbank sent a message. The strangers disappeared before they reached the water. They must have changed course." "Good," Mithridates replied. "Let them try to vanish. They leave trails even when they think they do not." They reached a narrow door guarded by two of the king's most trusted soldiers. The men bowed. Mithridates entered a dim chamber lit by only one lantern. Inside, 3 senior advisors sat waiting, older men with tired eyes, each of whom had served long enough to be allowed into conversations held at this hour. They rose as the king entered. "Speak," Mithridates said calmly. "Majesty," one advisor began, "messages arrived from the eastern markets. Travelers claim Rome sends new envoys disguised as cloth merchants. They ask about prices, routes, and the palace's distance from certain roads. They measure our kingdom in numbers," another advisor said. "Thinking numbers reveal its strength." Mithridates took a seat and rested his hands on the table. "And what did our watchers see?" "Nothing threatening," the first advisor said. But their questions were too specific. "Rome gathers pieces," the king said. "They believe enough pieces create a picture." He leaned back slightly. "But they forget who controls the canvas." The advisors exchanged subtle glances, part concern, part admiration. "Next," Mithridates said. Another tablet was offered. "From the hillside farms, Majesty, shepherds claim unfamiliar riders crossed the outer fields at dusk. They did not cause harm. They only observed, then rode north." "Romans testing distance," Yalmaris said. "Or testing our reactions," Mithridates replied. "Both matter." He dismissed the advisors with a nod. They rose quickly, grateful to leave without further questioning. The door closed behind them, leaving Mithridates and Yalmaris alone again with the low, steady torchlight. The king stood, moving into the adjoining gallery, where tall windows looked out over the sleeping city. The rooftops were dark, except for a few lit hearths. The sea reflected faint silver where the moon touched it. A breeze slipped through a narrow opening, carrying the cold scent of salt and distant rain. "Rome presses from many directions," Yalmaris said. "That is their mistake," Mithridates answered. "Many directions require many hands. Many hands create inconsistencies." He walked along the gallery, studying the darkness outside. When an enemy grows impatient, it creates noise, and noise reveals where its true focus lies. "And where do you believe Rome focuses?" Yalmaris asked Mithridates, paused before answering. "Not the borders, not the villages, not the nobles." He looked toward the mountains. They focus on me. As always, the general said. As always, Mithridates repeated. They left the gallery and moved into a smaller, torch-lit hall. Here, murals of past battles lined the walls, old victories, old warnings, old scars. Mithridates brushed his fingers lightly against a carved scene of his father's army. Rome does not understand a simple truth, he said. I do not rule because I am feared, I rule because I do not hesitate. Jalmaris nodded. And hesitation is Rome's flaw. The king stopped beside a bronze basin filled with cool water. He dipped his hands, letting the chill settle over his skin. Tomorrow we shift patrols again, he said. Not drastically, just enough to remove any pattern Rome believes it has found. Yes, Majesty. And send word to the mountain villages. Tell them to report strangers immediately, but quietly. No panic. As you command. They continued walking toward the royal quarters. The hall grew quieter still, the torches spaced farther apart. Shadows stretched long across the stone, but Mithridates moved through them without slowing. Every breath of darkness felt like a familiar companion. At the entrance to his private chambers, he paused. The palace was silent now, truly silent. Only the faint hum of night wind touched the windows. Rome believes it is tightening a net, he murmured. Jalmaris waited. But nets catch only the unaware, Mithridates said. I am not unaware. He entered his chambers, cloak settling behind him like a descending curtain. Jalmaris closed the doors. The Poison King faced the quiet of night with steady calm, already shaping tomorrow. Mithridates stood alone in his private chambers, the weight of the day still present but no longer sharp. The room was quiet in a way few places ever were. Heavy curtains softened the sounds from outside. The torches here were fewer, their flames low and steady, casting a warm, flickering glow across the carved walls and the polished floor. A single attendant waited near the doorway, head bowed. Majesty, he said softly, the final checks are complete. The guards are in position. The inner doors are secured. Good, Mithridates replied. You may retire. The attendant bowed again and slipped out, closing the door with a muted click. For the first time that day, the king was truly alone. He crossed the room slowly, hands clasped loosely behind his back. Along one wall sat a low table with a few objects arranged in careful order. A small clay lamp, a knife with a narrow blade, a sealed vial of clear liquid, and a thin strip of parchment with notes written in his own hand. Even here, in this most private space, he did not surround himself with luxury. Everything had a purpose. He lifted the knife first, testing its balance. Not because he feared an attack in this moment, but because routine itself comforted him more than silk cushions or scented oils ever could. The knife went back to its place. The vial he turned in his fingers, watching the faint shimmer of liquid inside. It was not poison this time, but an antidote, one he had urged his physicians to refine over weeks. He did not drink it. Knowing it existed within reach was enough for now. He set it down gently, then moved toward the narrow balcony that overlooked the sleeping city. The night outside was softer now, deep and still. The moon hung higher, bathing the rooftops in pale light. Most fires had burned low. A few lanterns still watched over streets and gates, but the city itself seemed to exhale. Mithridates rested his hands on the stone railing and let his gaze sweep across the horizon. The faint line of the sea, the shadow of the western mountains, the dark threads of roads leading outward into lands where strangers asked too many questions. Somewhere beyond those ridges, Roman scouts scribbled notes by fading firelight, trying to guess the movements of a man who never moved in straight lines. He did not pity them. He did not hate them. He simply refused to let them win. The air was cool against his face. He took one slow breath, then another, letting the sounds of the night settle around him. The distant murmur of waves, the faint creak of wood from docked ships, the almost inaudible clink of armor as a guard shifted his weight below. Finally, he turned back into the chamber. The bed was simple but broad, covered in thick woven fabric. Above it, the ceiling was painted with constellations, just as the one from his boyhood had been stars, and lines marked out figures from old stories. Hunters, warriors, forgotten kings. As a boy, he had studied those patterns to distract himself from the knowledge that his own family might kill him. As a man, he studied them to remember how long survival could last when paired with patience. He sat on the edge of the bed and loosened his cloak. The fabric slipped from his shoulders in a quiet fall, pooling behind him like a dark shadow finally allowed to rest. The room seemed to grow stiller, as if the walls themselves were listening. There was no evening prayer, no whispered plea to gods. His devotion was to awareness. Still, he allowed himself one small ritual. He looked up at the painted stars and traced, in his mind, the same path he traced as a child, across one constellation, down through another, folding back to the first. A quiet loop, a circle that always returned to its start. The poisons he had taken that day travelled through his blood in invisible patterns, reminders of every enemy who might try to attack him without coming near a blade. He did not fear them. They were old companions now, familiar in their burn, predictable in their force. His body had become a map of resistance, every day another line drawn. He lay back slowly, shoulders settling into the mattress. The ceiling came fully into view, the painted stars glowing softly in the torchlight. He let his arms rest at his sides. His breathing began to slow, not because he trusted the world outside his walls, but because he trusted his preparations inside them. Jalmaris commanded the guards. The archives held the warnings. The physicians refined the mixtures. The scouts watched the passes. The nobles, fearful as they were, still lived under the shelter of his rule. Rome could watch, test, and whisper as much as it liked. And as the Poison King's thoughts dissolved into the dark, the night itself seemed to still, making room for a few hours of heavily guarded rest. Enough to begin again when the next dawn touched the stone.